What happens when the truth is physically impossible to find, yet impossible to ignore? After half a century of forensic breakthroughs and international searches, we are left with a haunting paradox. We have mapped her movements, analyzed her chemistry, and traced her footsteps across a continent. Today, we confront the final layer, the humanity behind the code name, and why, in an age of total surveillance, the Isdal Woman remains history's most perfectly executed vanishing act. If you are watching this right now, I want to ask you something. How much of history do you think is actually true? Because what you are about to hear was never meant to reach you. These are the classified files, the buried evidence, and the forbidden stories that powerful forces spent decades trying to erase. If you are someone who refuses to accept the official story, you are in the right place. Subscribe to the Dark History Files and join thousands of truth seekers uncovering what history tried to hide. Welcome back. This is the Dark History Files, and today we expose a truth that was never meant to be told. Decades after the discovery in Isdal, the evidence returns to laboratories that look very different from those available in 1970. Modern forensic equipment replaces many of the manual techniques once considered the highest standard of investigation. Carefully preserved samples, archived photographs, and sealed evidence boxes become the focus of renewed attention. Items that had remained silent for years are examined with instruments capable of detecting details that earlier investigators could never have measured, offering the possibility of fresh insight without altering the original evidence itself. The atmosphere inside these laboratories carries a different kind of quiet from the valley where the mystery began. Instead of damp earth and mountain air, there is the soft hum of analytical instruments and the careful rhythm of technicians handling evidence with measured precision. Bright lights reveal tiny details hidden within aging materials, while digital displays translate invisible chemical patterns into readable information. Every examination feels less like reopening an old file and more like allowing forgotten evidence to speak through a language that did not yet exist when the case first began. As new testing methods are introduced, long-accepted assumptions begin to face careful re-examination. Investigators compare earlier reports with modern findings, searching for places where improved technology might clarify uncertain conclusions. Questions once considered impossible to answer suddenly become practical lines of inquiry. Small samples preserved decades earlier now contain information that could not have been extracted at the time. The investigation quietly shifts from accepting historical limitations toward exploring possibilities created by scientific progress, revealing how evidence can acquire new meaning as knowledge itself evolves. This renewed effort carries a quiet mixture of hope and regret. Modern science offers remarkable tools, yet it also reminds investigators of opportunities that disappeared with passing years. Some evidence has naturally deteriorated, some witnesses are no longer available, and certain investigative choices can never be repeated under modern conditions. Even so, the return to the evidence reflects something deeply human. The search continues not because the mystery has grown easier, but because every generation believes that new understanding may finally illuminate a truth that remained hidden from those who searched before. One of the most significant changes in the renewed investigation came through advances in forensic genetics. When the Isdal Woman was first discovered, DNA profiling did not yet exist as a practical investigative tool. Detectives depended largely on fingerprints, dental records, personal belongings, and witness testimony to establish identity. Decades later, preserved biological material offered scientists an opportunity that the original investigators had never possessed. Evidence collected long ago could now be examined using techniques capable of identifying relationships and ancestral origins with extraordinary precision, provided that enough usable material had survived the passage of time. Researchers approached this work with careful expectations. Time affects every piece of physical evidence, and biological samples preserved for decades often present difficult challenges. Heat, environmental exposure, and earlier handling can reduce the amount of recoverable genetic material available for analysis. Even so, improvements in laboratory methods allowed specialists to work with much smaller samples than previous generations considered useful. Tiny fragments that once appeared scientifically exhausted could now contain meaningful information when examined through modern analytical techniques developed many years after the original investigation had ended. Alongside genetic testing, scientists also revisited physical evidence using technologies capable of extracting information invisible to earlier investigators. Advanced imaging methods, improved chemical analysis, and more refined laboratory procedures offered opportunities to examine preserved evidence with fresh perspective. Rather than replacing the original investigation, these methods expanded it. Earlier reports provided valuable foundations, while modern science asked new questions of the same materials. The combination of historical documentation and contemporary analysis created a dialogue across decades, allowing investigators separated by generations to contribute to the same unresolved mystery. Yet every scientific breakthrough carried an important reminder about the limits of evidence. Technology could identify patterns, measure chemical signatures, and compare genetic information with unprecedented accuracy, but it could not recover evidence that had never been collected or restore opportunities lost during the earliest days of the case. Investigators understood that modern laboratories were not rewriting history. They were working within the boundaries established decades earlier by the evidence that remained. Even with remarkable scientific progress, the search continued to depend upon a delicate partnership between preserved material, careful interpretation, and the enduring hope that one overlooked detail might finally connect the unknown woman to the identity that had escaped discovery for so many years. Modern forensic science also encouraged investigators to look beyond the immediate cause of death and examine the broader story carried within the woman's remains. One of the most valuable techniques involved isotopic analysis, a method capable of revealing clues about where a person had lived or spent different periods of life. Tiny chemical signatures preserved in teeth and bones can reflect the water, food, and environment experienced over many years. Unlike names or documents, these natural markers cannot easily be altered, making them especially valuable in cases where identity has been deliberately concealed. When specialists applied these methods to the Isdal Woman case, the results introduced an important new perspective. The evidence suggested that she had likely spent her early years in Central Europe before later moving through other regions during adulthood. While this finding could not identify her by name, it significantly narrowed the range of possibilities investigators needed to consider. For the first time, modern science provided information rooted not in witness memory or recovered belongings, but in the physical history preserved within her own body throughout her lifetime. These discoveries also prompted researchers to revisit older investigative assumptions. Earlier theories had often relied upon travel records, accents described by witnesses, or the nationalities associated with her false identities. Isotopic evidence offered an independent line of inquiry that neither confirmed nor rejected those observations outright. Instead, it added another layer to the growing body of evidence. Investigators compared scientific findings with historical records, searching for places where different forms of evidence supported one another and recognizing where important uncertainties continued to remain. The renewed investigation demonstrated that modern science could reveal aspects of a person's life that even the individual may never have consciously noticed. Long before the woman crossed European borders under different names, her environment had quietly left chemical traces within her body that endured across decades. Those traces became silent witnesses after every document had failed and every conversation had faded from memory. Although they did not solve the mystery completely, they transformed the investigation by replacing broad speculation with measurable evidence. In a case defined by carefully hidden identity, nature itself preserved a record that proved remarkably difficult to erase, offering investigators one of the clearest glimpses yet into the unknown woman's forgotten past. By the time modern forensic science had completed its newest examinations, the Isdal Woman case had entered a remarkable place in investigative history. It was no longer defined only by what detectives had discovered in 1970, but also by what later generations of scientists had been able to uncover from the same preserved evidence. Every advance in technology expanded the conversation rather than ending it. New findings refined earlier assumptions, challenged long-accepted ideas, and revealed details that had remained invisible for decades. Yet the central mystery continued to resist a final answer. The renewed investigation also demonstrated an important truth about unsolved cases. Evidence is not fixed in its ability to speak. As scientific knowledge grows, old material can reveal information that previous investigators had no practical way of obtaining. A sealed evidence box may appear unchanged on the outside, but the questions scientists are capable of asking evolve from one generation to the next. In this way, the passage of time becomes more than a source of loss. It also creates unexpected opportunities for forgotten cases to be understood from entirely new perspectives. Even so, every breakthrough carried a quiet reminder that science has limits as well as strengths. Technology could estimate regions of origin, recover fragments of genetic information, and analyze chemical signatures with extraordinary accuracy. It could not restore witnesses whose memories had faded, recover records that had been destroyed, or recreate decisions made during the earliest days of the investigation. Some questions had become permanently more difficult simply because decades had passed before the necessary tools existed. The search for truth, therefore, depended not only upon innovation, but also upon accepting the boundaries history had already imposed. The Isdal Woman remained unidentified, but she was no longer quite as invisible as she had once been. Modern science had recovered pieces of her story that earlier investigators could only imagine, allowing history to move a little closer to the person hidden behind the mystery. Yet her name, her purpose, and the full path that brought her to Isdalen continued to lie beyond confirmed evidence. The next chapter of the investigation would turn away from laboratories and back toward people, as forgotten witnesses, journalists, and independent researchers reopened old memories in the hope that human recollection might reveal what even the most advanced science could not. Science has finally pulled back the veil on her physical past, revealing origins that no document could have told us. But while the lab results provide the foundation, the real heartbeat of this mystery lies in the voices of those who actually met her. Many years after the original investigation, the official evidence remains carefully preserved, but attention begins shifting toward the people who once stood at the edges of the mystery. Former hotel employees, retired police officers, hikers, and ordinary citizens revisit events they experienced only briefly decades earlier. Old notebooks, newspaper clippings, and forgotten interview transcripts return to the surface. Individually, these fragments appear modest. Together, they offer another opportunity to examine a story that history never fully allowed to fade from public memory. Remembering the past brings an experience unlike examining physical evidence. Voices hesitate before describing details that have remained undisturbed for decades. The quiet turning of old paper, the sound of archived recordings, and the careful search through fading photographs create an atmosphere filled with thoughtful reflection rather than certainty. Memories return in unexpected pieces, sometimes triggered by a familiar image or a forgotten headline. The passage of time softens many details while leaving certain moments preserved with remarkable clarity. As journalists and independent researchers begin asking new questions, witnesses sometimes recall observations they never considered important during the original investigation. A brief conversation, an unusual glance, or a forgotten encounter gradually returns to memory after years of silence. Other accounts evolve in different ways, shaped by the natural changes that affect every human recollection. Investigators compare these renewed statements with historical records, searching for places where memory strengthens documented evidence and recognizing where later recollections begin moving in unexpected directions. These returning voices reveal something deeply human about unsolved mysteries. Evidence may rest quietly inside archives, but memory continues living within the people who experienced even the smallest part of the story. Some recollections reinforce what investigators already believed. Others gently challenge long accepted assumptions by introducing details that had never entered the official record. The search, therefore, becomes more than a review of old documents. It becomes an effort to understand how memory preserves truth, reshapes experience, and occasionally uncovers forgotten moments that history nearly allowed to disappear. As renewed public interest in the Isdal Woman grew, journalists began locating people whose names had appeared only briefly in the original investigation. Some had worked in hotels where the mysterious traveler stayed. Others had encountered her in restaurants, railway stations, or shops without realizing their ordinary interactions would later become part of an international mystery. Decades had passed since those meetings, yet several witnesses still remembered unexpected details. Certain expressions, patterns of behavior, or unusual moments had remained quietly fixed in memory long after many other everyday experiences had disappeared. Interviewing these witnesses required patience rather than urgency. Researchers understood that memory is neither a perfect recording nor a simple invention. It changes over time, influenced by later experiences, newspaper reports, and repeated conversations. For that reason, every recollection had to be compared carefully with documents created much closer to the original events. A witness might sincerely remember something that never occurred, while another might unexpectedly preserve an accurate observation overlooked by investigators decades earlier. The challenge lay in recognizing the difference without dismissing either possibility too quickly. Some renewed interviews proved remarkably valuable because they strengthened details already present in the historical record. Independent witnesses described similar habits, comparable travel routines, or consistent aspects of the woman's appearance without relying on one another's accounts. These overlapping memories increased confidence that certain observations reflected genuine experience rather than coincidence. At the same time, other interviews introduced differences that complicated the investigation. Small changes in remembered dates, locations, or conversations encouraged researchers to reconsider whether earlier timelines had overlooked important possibilities or whether natural memory had gradually reshaped those events over the years. The growing collection of interviews reminded investigators that human memory functions differently from physical evidence. A photograph preserves a single instant exactly as it was captured. Memory preserves meaning, emotion, and impression, often giving greater importance to some details while allowing others to fade. Rather than treating this as a weakness, experienced researchers viewed it as another source of information requiring careful interpretation. The witnesses were not replacing the official investigation. They were adding another layer to it, offering personal perspectives that could illuminate forgotten corners of the mystery while demanding the same thoughtful scrutiny applied to every other piece of evidence. As independent researchers compared fresh interviews with archived police files, they discovered that the most interesting developments often appeared where memory and documentation intersected. Some witnesses described small actions that had never seemed important enough to mention during the original investigation. Others remembered locations, conversations, or sequences of events that encouraged investigators to review official timelines with renewed attention. These additions did not overturn the historical record. Instead, they invited a careful comparison between what had been written down decades earlier and what people still carried in memory after so many years. Journalists also played an important role by bringing forgotten aspects of the case back into public discussion. Newspaper articles, documentaries, and investigative broadcasts reached audiences far beyond Norway, encouraging new individuals to come forward with information or personal recollections. Occasionally, someone recognized a detail that connected with an old family story or an encounter long dismissed as unimportant. Most new leads ultimately proved unrelated, yet each one demonstrated that the mystery continued living beyond police archives. Public attention itself became another way of searching for overlooked pieces of the past. Not every renewed account strengthened the investigation. Some recollections differed from earlier statements in meaningful ways, creating uncertainty rather than clarity. A witness might remember a date differently or describe an appearance that no longer matched preserved records. These differences did not necessarily imply dishonesty. Researchers understood that memory evolves naturally as years pass, influenced by repeated reflection and changing perspective. Instead of rejecting conflicting accounts outright, investigators evaluated them alongside contemporary documents, recognizing that disagreement could sometimes reveal just as much about the limits of recollection as agreement revealed about historical truth. By this stage, the investigation had become a conversation across generations. Detectives from the original case, modern researchers, journalists, and ordinary witnesses all contributed different forms of knowledge shaped by their own experiences and methods. The mystery no longer depended upon a single source of evidence. It emerged from the careful balance between preserved records, scientific analysis, and human remembrance. Each perspective carried its own strengths and limitations, yet together they formed a richer understanding of a woman whose identity remained concealed. Even after decades, forgotten voices continued adding quiet depth to a story that history had never fully finished telling. By the close of this renewed search, investigators had gained something valuable even without discovering the woman's true identity. The returning witnesses did not solve the mystery through one dramatic revelation. Instead, they strengthened the investigation by restoring forgotten context to events that had gradually faded into history. Small conversations, ordinary observations, and quiet personal impressions filled spaces that official reports could never fully capture. These additions rarely answered the largest questions directly, yet they made the unknown woman feel more like a real person than an unsolved case preserved inside an archive. The renewed interviews also demonstrated that unresolved mysteries continue changing long after the original investigation has ended. Every generation brings different questions, different methods, and different perspectives to the same collection of evidence. What earlier detectives considered unimportant may later become meaningful when viewed beside scientific discoveries or newly recovered documents. At the same time, researchers must remain aware that memory grows more fragile with passing years. Every recovered recollection, therefore, carries both potential value and unavoidable uncertainty, requiring careful comparison with the historical record rather than unquestioning acceptance. Perhaps the most enduring contribution of these witnesses was not the specific details they remembered, but their willingness to keep speaking after so much time had passed. Their memories reminded investigators that history is preserved not only in official files, but also in ordinary people who unexpectedly become part of extraordinary events. Many had believed their brief encounters carried little significance until decades later, when those forgotten moments became meaningful pieces of a much larger story. In sharing their experiences once again, they ensured that the search for the unknown woman remained a living investigation rather than a forgotten historical curiosity. As this chapter closes, the mystery stands on stronger foundations than ever before, yet its central question remains unanswered. Physical evidence has been re-examined. Modern science has offered new insights. Witnesses have revisited memories once thought permanently lost. Together, these efforts have narrowed possibilities while revealing just how carefully the woman's identity had been concealed. The final stage of the journey now approaches. Rather than searching for additional evidence, attention will turn toward the competing explanations that have emerged over the decades, each attempting to illuminate the same mystery from a different direction while leaving one final truth beyond certain reach. Memories are fading, yet they remain our only bridge to her personality. Journalists have combed through decades of testimonies, finding threads that official police reports missed. But as we piece together these accounts, a new layer emerges, the theory of her motive. After decades of investigation, the evidence forms a landscape of possibilities rather than a single clear path. Police files, forensic reports, witness memories, and scientific findings lie side by side, each illuminating different parts of the mystery. None of them fully contradict the others, yet none combine into one complete explanation. Instead, the case resembles a collection of overlapping outlines where every theory highlights certain facts, while leaving other important details unexplained. Exploring these theories creates an atmosphere unlike the search for physical evidence. Old documents unfold across tables as researchers compare timelines, witness accounts, and laboratory results collected across different generations. Quiet discussions replace confident conclusions, and every proposed explanation carries both convincing points and uncomfortable gaps. The experience feels less like solving a puzzle and more like walking through a room filled with half-finished portraits, each resembling the unknown woman in some meaningful way without ever becoming unmistakably complete. As investigators compare competing interpretations, familiar evidence begins taking on different meanings depending on the perspective applied. False identities may suggest covert activity to one researcher while indicating personal concealment to another. Frequent travel can appear carefully planned or entirely practical. Even the missing clothing labels invite more than one reasonable explanation. The evidence itself remains unchanged, yet the questions surrounding it continue evolving. Every theory quietly rearranges the same collection of facts into a different possible story, without fully resolving the uncertainty at its center. This stage of the investigation invites a different kind of reflection. Rather than searching for another hidden document or forgotten witness, Attention turns toward understanding how mysteries endure when evidence supports several believable possibilities at once. The Isdal Woman case demonstrates that uncertainty is not always created by missing information alone. Sometimes it emerges because existing evidence can be understood in more than one convincing way. That delicate balance between possibility and proof has allowed the mystery to survive across generations, encouraging careful thought while resisting every attempt at a final conclusion. One of the most widely discussed explanations is that the unknown woman may have been involved in espionage. This theory draws attention to several confirmed features of the case, including her use of multiple identities, her extensive travel across Europe, her ability to communicate in several languages, and her visits to areas that some researchers have associated with strategic military importance. Considered together, these observations create a narrative that appears consistent with certain intelligence practices known from the Cold War era. Yet even taken as a whole, they stop short of providing direct proof that she worked for any intelligence organization. Another interpretation suggests a connection to organized criminal activity or covert smuggling networks operating across European borders during that period. Supporters of this view point to the careful concealment of identity, the repeated use of false names, and the apparent effort to remove identifying marks from personal belongings. Such methods could have served purposes unrelated to espionage, while still requiring secrecy and frequent international travel. However, investigators found no verified evidence directly linking the unknown woman to any criminal organization. As with the espionage theory, the available facts encourage consideration without establishing certainty. Some researchers have proposed a more personal explanation. They suggest that the woman may have deliberately hidden her identity because of private circumstances rather than professional obligations. Personal trauma, fear of someone from her past, financial difficulties, or other deeply individual reasons might explain why she traveled under assumed names and avoided leaving identifiable records. This interpretation requires fewer assumptions about hidden organizations, yet it faces its own challenges. It offers possible motivations for secrecy, but does not fully account for the unusual consistency and sophistication with which that secrecy appeared to be maintained over time. Each of these theories demonstrates the same underlying challenge. The confirmed evidence supports several reasonable interpretations while refusing to favor one conclusively over the others. A particular detail may strengthen one explanation, yet fit another almost equally well when viewed from a different perspective. Investigators therefore continue approaching these possibilities with careful restraint. The value of each theory lies not in claiming certainty, but in encouraging thoughtful examination of evidence that has resisted simple interpretation for more than half a century. In the Isdal Woman case, the greatest mystery may not be the number of theories that exist, but the remarkable way each one appears convincing until another equally plausible explanation quietly emerges beside it. Another possibility explored by researchers centers on the idea of carefully staged deception rather than membership in any particular organization. According to this interpretation, the false names, removed clothing labels, and unusual travel habits may have been intended simply to prevent anyone from reconstructing the woman's life. The goal would not necessarily have been espionage or criminal activity, but the deliberate creation of uncertainty itself. If so, many of the mysterious elements surrounding the case achieved exactly what they were designed to accomplish. Decades later, investigators still struggle to separate authentic identity from carefully constructed appearance. Some investigators have also considered whether psychological circumstances played a significant role. A person experiencing profound personal distress or attempting to leave behind an earlier life might choose new names, avoid meaningful relationships, and travel continuously without establishing permanent roots. This perspective emphasizes individual experience rather than hidden organizations or international intrigue. Even so, important questions remain unanswered. The remarkable consistency of the woman's preparations, the careful removal of identifying information, and the complexity of her movements continue to challenge explanations based solely on personal isolation or emotional hardship. The enduring strength of the Isdal Woman mystery lies in the way different theories illuminate different sections of the evidence. The espionage hypothesis offers one explanation for international travel and multiple identities. Personal concealment provides another way of understanding the absence of documentation and lasting relationships. Deliberate deception helps explain why investigators repeatedly encountered carefully managed uncertainty. None of these perspectives fully accounts for every verified fact. Instead, each leaves behind unanswered questions that another theory attempts to address without achieving complete success. As researchers compare these competing explanations, an important realization gradually emerges. The investigation is no longer focused only on discovering which theory appears most dramatic or most widely accepted. It is focused on understanding which explanation remains most faithful to the evidence, while requiring the fewest unsupported assumptions. That careful distinction has guided responsible investigators for decades. The mystery continues because every proposed answer eventually reaches a point where confirmed facts become scarce and interpretation begins. Beyond that boundary, certainty gives way to possibility, and the unknown woman quietly returns to the shadows that have concealed her identity for so many years. After decades of investigation, scientific analysis, witness interviews, and careful debate, the Isdal Woman remains suspended between history and mystery. Every major theory contributes something valuable to the search for understanding, yet none succeeds in explaining every confirmed detail. The evidence continues to invite thoughtful interpretation while resisting absolute certainty. Rather than revealing one final answer, the case has become an enduring reminder that some historical mysteries survive not because investigators failed to search carefully, but because the surviving evidence genuinely supports more than one reasonable conclusion. The lasting significance of these competing explanations reaches beyond the identity of one unknown traveler. They demonstrate how easily human understanding can be shaped by perspective. A change in historical context, a new scientific discovery, or a forgotten witness statement can transform the meaning of evidence that has remained physically unchanged for decades. Responsible investigation therefore requires more than curiosity. It demands the discipline to distinguish established fact from persuasive possibility, even when uncertainty feels deeply unsatisfying. Perhaps that is why the Isdal Woman continues to fascinate people around the world. The mystery offers no convenient ending, no dramatic confession, and no document waiting quietly inside a forgotten archive with every answer already written upon it. Instead, it presents something far more unusual. It asks each generation to examine the same collection of evidence with fresh eyes, recognizing both the progress made by earlier investigators and the questions they could never fully resolve. In doing so, the case becomes an ongoing conversation between history, science, and human imagination rather than a story with a fixed conclusion. As the documentary approaches its final chapter, the focus shifts away from competing theories and returns to the woman herself. Behind every investigation, every laboratory report, and every public debate stood a real human life whose name has never been confirmed. The final part will leave the evidence behind and reflect on the remarkable legacy of a person who entered history without an identity. More than half a century has passed since she was discovered in Isdal, yet the simplest question ever asked about her continues to echo with quiet persistence. Who was she, and why did someone work so carefully to ensure that the answer would remain unknown? The theories are endless: espionage, criminal syndicates, or a desperate flight from personal trauma. We have scrutinized every motive, but as we approach the final revelation, we find that the most chilling theory is the one that suggests she was the architect of her own erasure. More than half a century has passed since the unknown woman was discovered in Isdal, yet the official case file continues to grow rather than fade into history. Shelves of preserved evidence, forensic reports, witness statements, and scientific analyses now surround a mystery that began with a single discovery on a quiet Norwegian hillside. Each generation has added another layer of understanding without uncovering the one detail that matters most. Among thousands of recorded facts, one simple piece of information remains absent. Her true name has never been confirmed. Looking back across the decades creates a quiet emotional landscape shaped by persistence instead of certainty. The sounds that now surround the investigation are no longer those of detectives searching a mountainside, but of archivists opening carefully preserved files, researchers turning aging pages, and laboratories examining evidence once again. Every effort reflects the belief that even the smallest forgotten clue may still carry meaning. Hope has become quieter with time, yet it continues moving steadily through every renewed examination of the case. As years become decades, the mystery itself begins to change. New investigators replace retiring detectives, modern technology succeeds older methods, and fresh perspectives challenge long accepted assumptions. Each generation inherits the same unanswered question while contributing knowledge unavailable to those who searched before. Progress is undeniable, yet every advance reveals another horizon beyond it. The investigation continues evolving because history itself keeps offering new ways to understand evidence that earlier generations could only observe without fully interpreting. Perhaps that is why the Isdal woman remains unforgettable. She is no longer remembered only as an unidentified traveler or the subject of an unsolved investigation. She has become a reminder that every unknown name once belonged to a real human life filled with ordinary moments, private hopes, and unseen experiences. The mystery has always been larger than missing documents or hidden identities. At its heart lies a person whose existence can be carefully studied, yet whose story continues waiting just beyond the reach of certainty, inviting every generation to keep searching with quiet curiosity. The enduring power of the Isdal Woman mystery lies not only in the questions it raises, but also in the extraordinary effort invested in answering them. Police officers searched remote hillsides. Forensic specialists examined preserved evidence. Scientists applied technologies that did not exist when the case began, and journalists carried the story across the world in search of forgotten witnesses. Each generation approached the investigation with different tools and different knowledge. Yet despite these remarkable efforts, every path eventually returned to the same quiet uncertainty surrounding the woman's true identity. One reason the mystery continues to resonate is that it resists becoming a simple historical curiosity. Most investigations eventually arrive at a point where names are confirmed, families are notified, and events settle into a documented sequence. The Isdal Woman case followed a different course. The evidence gradually revealed where she traveled, how she concealed her identity, and even clues about the region where she may have spent her early life. Those discoveries transformed understanding without delivering recognition. The woman became increasingly visible through evidence, while remaining personally unknown to history. Researchers often reflect on how close the investigation sometimes appears to reaching a breakthrough. A newly examined sample, an overlooked witness statement, or an old photograph can briefly suggest that the final answer may be within reach. Yet each promising lead eventually encounters the same challenge. One essential connection remains missing. Without that final link, carefully assembled evidence continues to describe a remarkable life without identifying the individual who lived it. The mystery therefore survives not because investigators lack determination, but because one crucial piece of the historical record has never been found. This quiet absence gives the Isdal woman a place unlike almost any other unsolved case. She has become both a historical figure and an unknown person at the same time. Millions have learned about her story, yet no one can confidently speak her real name. Every preserved document, every scientific discovery, and every witness memory brings us closer to understanding how she lived, but not who she truly was. That distinction continues to define the investigation. The search has never been only for evidence. It has always been an effort to restore identity to someone whose existence became separated from the name that once belonged to her. The mystery also invites a quieter reflection about the nature of identity itself. A name, a passport, a photograph, or a signature often feels permanent while a person is alive. Yet the Isdal Woman case demonstrates how fragile those connections can become when they are deliberately removed or simply lost with time. Investigators recovered belongings, reconstructed journeys, analyzed scientific evidence, and listened to countless witnesses. Together, those efforts revealed an extraordinary amount about her life. Still, the simplest marker of identity remained absent, reminding us that a human story can survive even when the name attached to it has disappeared. There is another reason the case continues to matter after so many decades. It represents the remarkable determination of people who refuse to accept that unanswered questions should simply be forgotten. Detectives preserved evidence with care. Scientists revisited that evidence using methods unavailable to earlier generations. Journalists searched for overlooked voices, and independent researchers patiently compared records scattered across countries and decades. None of them could guarantee success. Even so, each contributed another careful layer of understanding, ensuring that the unknown woman was remembered as more than a forgotten entry in an old police archive. Perhaps the greatest achievement of the investigation has not been solving the mystery, but preserving it with honesty. Responsible investigators consistently distinguished confirmed evidence from attractive speculation, resisting the temptation to force uncertain facts into convenient conclusions. That discipline has allowed later generations to return to the case without inheriting unsupported assumptions as established truth. In many ways, the integrity of the investigation has become part of its legacy. The search continues because those who came before chose careful accuracy over easy answers. As the story approaches its final moments, one realization quietly stands above every theory, every laboratory result, and every historical debate. The unknown woman has never truly disappeared. She continues to exist through the questions she left behind and through the people who continue searching for her identity with patience rather than certainty. The investigation has revealed where she traveled, how she concealed herself, and why the mystery became so enduring. Only one final question remains waiting at the center of everything. It is the same question first asked on that autumn day in Isdal. Who was the woman who left the world without a name? The story of the Isdal woman ends where it has always quietly begun, with an unanswered question carried across more than half a century. The valley outside Bergen has returned to its familiar rhythm. The hotel rooms have welcomed countless new travelers, and the railway station has watched generations come and go. Time has continued its steady course, yet the mystery has refused to disappear with it. Instead, it has settled into history as one of those rare cases that continues inviting careful thought long after the original investigation has ended. Perhaps the greatest lesson hidden within this mystery is not about espionage, false identities, or secret organizations. It is about the value of persistence when certainty remains out of reach. Every detective, scientist, journalist, and witness added something meaningful without claiming to possess the complete answer. Together, they demonstrated that understanding often grows through patience rather than dramatic revelation. Even when the final truth remains hidden, the search itself preserves dignity for the person whose story might otherwise have been forgotten. The Isdal Woman never became only a mystery. She became a reminder that behind every unidentified case stands a human life filled with experiences that once felt ordinary. Somewhere there were places she remembered, conversations she valued, and moments that shaped the person she became long before she reached Norway. Those parts of her story may never be recovered completely, but acknowledging their existence changes the way the investigation is remembered. The evidence describes an unknown traveler. Quiet reflection reminds us that she was also someone's daughter, friend, colleague, or companion, even if history can no longer tell us whose. And so the case remains open in the minds of those who continue to study it. Not because every clue has been exhausted, but because the possibility of understanding has never fully disappeared. Somewhere, perhaps in an overlooked archive, a forgotten photograph, or a family memory that has yet to be connected, the missing piece may still exist. Until that day arrives, the Isdal Woman remains one of history's most haunting unanswered stories. Her name is unknown. Her journey is only partly understood. Yet her presence continues to ask the quietest and most enduring question of all. How can someone leave behind so much evidence and still remain almost completely unknown? The valley is silent, and her files are buried in the dust of history. We've dismantled every theory, from Cold War spies to a life she couldn't outrun. Yet, she remains a ghost. She reminds us that identity is a fragile flame, one that she chose to extinguish herself. She didn't leave a story, she left a riddle. How can someone leave behind so much evidence, and yet remain perfectly unknown?